I've been into motorcycles my whole life since I was a little kid. I started out buying dirt bikes, it was mini bikes. Then I went to bigger motorcycles. You know, I've been into that my whole life.
One of the best thing that Frank purveyed is that antiques are just like a big Easter egg hunt. You know, when you go to an antique store, you're looking in the corners, or if you're in somebody's garage, and it's the joy of the hunt.
After Frank Fritz, the face synonymous with American pickers, passed away in silence, many thought his story would end like that of any other antique collector. But it didn't. Everything truly began when the dusty garage door of his was pried open by court order. Inside, among the priceless vintage cars, everyone expected was something no one had ever seen. No documentation, no license plate, no VIN. A vehicle that had never existed on any official blueprint, accompanied by a mysterious note, "I left everything there, Frank." And when that car was brought into the light, things more terrifying than death began to emerge. Not just collectors' museums and international auction houses swarmed in like vultures. Even Mike Wolfe, the man who had called Frank his best friend for over a decade on national television, suddenly claimed a share in the will, asserting legal ownership of the car. Mike pulled out every possible argument to stake his claim. Did Frank really leave him that car, or was this just a power play among men who once shared a show, a spotlight, a fleeting moment of fame? Could true friendship be distorted by the worth of an artifact never meant to be known? Watch the full video to uncover the truth behind this mysterious machine and those now locked in battle for it. 1. Frank, a deep and lasting passion. Frank Fritz, a name familiar to millions of fans of American pickers, was not just a famed treasure hunter, but a fervent devotee of classic four- and two-wheeled machines. In Frank's eyes, every old vehicle was more than just a means of transport. It was a soul forged in steel, a story told in gears and gasoline, deserving to be heard and revered. His love for vehicles started in his childhood in Davenport, Iowa. While other kids played football or caught frogs in the fields, Frank was dismantling bikes, pinning motorcycle posters on his bedroom wall, and collecting miniature die-cast models. That obsession didn't fade. It grew into a lifelong mission to hunt, restore, and preserve mechanical legends fading from America's memory. It was no coincidence that in over 300 episodes of American Pickers, Frank's eyes always lit up when he discovered a dusty motorcycle in a barn or a rusting classic car abandoned behind a cowshed. He never saw those vehicles with a dealer's eye, but with the heart of a mechanical artist who understood every spark plug, every engine block, every ounce of cultural heritage a vehicle could carry. That's why, in life, Frank was never just a collector. He didn't buy vehicles. He hunted them. He chased down forgotten memories wrapped in steel and chrome. From his very first appearance on screen with American Pickers, it was clear Frank wasn't chasing fame. He was chasing truth, hidden in dense rust lines and layers of faded paint. He didn't buy vehicles to show off. He preserved them like artifacts, like a street archaeologist of America's asphalt past. His collection grew, not with noise, but with reverence. At his private farm in Iowa, Frank housed a collection of over 40 vintage motorcycles, from Harley-Davidson flatheads and 1940s Indian Chiefs to 1970s Honda Trail 70s. Each one cleaned, maintained and positioned like sacred relics in a private garage museum for only the most respectful to witness. One of the most iconic moments on television was when Frank and Mike Wolfe uncovered the 1914 Mertz cycle car, a hybrid between motorcycle and automobile, a true rarity. Frank transformed into a child again, trembling as he touched the vintage steering wheel. Voice shaking with joy, "This isn't just a car. This is time frozen in steel." That line hit millions in the gut, a raw, unfiltered confession of love. Frank didn't just hunt cars, he lived with them. In one interview he shared, "An old vehicle might not start, but it holds the breath of a whole generation. When you bring it back to life, you're reviving a lost part of America." That mindset didn't just make Frank different. It made him a true inspiration to the vintage vehicle community. His devotion earned him a place in the Sturgis Motorcycle Museum Hall of Fame, honoring those who contributed to America's motorcycle heritage. To thousands of bikers, Frank wasn't a TV personality. He was a brother of the open road, someone who saw beauty in a rusted frame and never turned his back on what was considered obsolete. But Frank didn't stop at common models. When he came across something extraordinary, he went all in. That's how he came to own two 1954 Nash Healeys, worth $46,000 in total. Then a 1914 Mertz tricycle, an odd, otherworldly machine valued at nearly $35,000, and finally, his most treasured possession, a 1947 Cisitalia Nuvolari Spider, an Italian masterpiece from the post-war era, light fast, and so rare that only a few exist globally, valued at over $500,000. It was the crown jewel in Frank's hidden trove. Every car told a story, and Frank remembered each one. From discovering it in a dusty shed to a multi-state haul or a 2 a.m. online auction, he could recall every detail: how he found it, why it mattered to him, and why it deserved to live again, not just as a machine, but as a resurrected memory. But now Frank's story might not end there. That non-existent car might be the key to a mystery bigger than anything he ever pursued. And if Frank truly left a trail for someone to follow, maybe a whole new journey is just beginning. 2. Death in solitude and sickness. As over time, Frank became increasingly withdrawn. He lived in isolation, and the garage, once a symbol of passion, gradually turned into a world of its own. Even those closest to him were no longer allowed inside. And after Frank passed away, when the final door was broken open, what was found inside left everyone speechless. Before diving into the mystery, let's understand why Frank bid farewell to this world. After nearly a decade traveling across America with Mike Wolfe on television, Frank suddenly disappeared from American pickers in 2021. The initial explanation was back surgery, but the reality was far more brutal. Relentless physical pain dragged Frank into the spiral of prescription painkiller addiction. At the same time, Crohn's disease, a chronic intestinal illness he had battled since youth, relapsed, stealing both the strength and spirit of a man who once braved any condition to chase America's buried treasures. In July 2022, tragedy struck. Frank suffered a massive stroke. He was found unconscious in his home and rushed to the hospital in critical condition. The stroke caused severe brain damage. He could no longer speak, no longer care for himself. From then on, Frank was placed under guardianship, stripped of all decision-making over his own life, living in a long-term care facility where his remaining days were quietly counted down. In his final 2 years, Frank no longer appeared in public. But according to Mike Wolfe, the friend with whom he once had tensions but who ultimately stayed, Frank remained conscious of his love for vehicles, for friendship, for their shared memories. He couldn't speak anymore, but his eyes still lit up when I mentioned the old red Indian Mike said through tears. Frank was no longer the smiling man on TV. He lived quietly in his old home in Davenport, Iowa, away from the media, with no social media, no interviews, no shows. The garage, once alive with laughter and the roar of engines, had become eerily silent. Frank no longer spoke of new vehicles. No more excited posts, and no one was allowed inside anymore. On September 30th, 2024, on a cold night in Iowa, Frank took his last breath, but not a single cast member from American Pickers came to visit. Mike Wolfe and Danielle Colby remained completely silent. The official cause of death was reported as long-term complications from cerebrovascular stroke. But everyone knew Frank's death wasn't just medical. It was the result of battles he had fought alone. Against illness, addiction, time, and himself. After Frank's passing, his store, Frank Fritz Finds, also faded away. No one restocked. No one cleaned the antiques he had once cherished. Only the heavy sighs of loyal fans remained tearful tributes, scattered online, and the crushing silence within the collector community, where a once fiery heart had finally stopped beating. Frank left quietly, with no grand funeral. But that very silence made it all the more painful. He didn't just die from disease, but from a world that no longer had space for sensitive souls, ones filled with passion, yet unable to weather the storm of life. And there, in that final moment, Frank Fritz became a quiet symbol for everyone who had ever loved something with their whole heart. Yet even after Frank stopped living, his collection continued to grow in silence. Though he was no longer riding the roads, Frank was still buying vehicles, sometimes through intermediaries, sometimes ordered from afar. To others, it may have seemed reckless. To Frank, it was instinct, one sharpened over decades. Every purchase had a purpose. Every vehicle was a new piece in the grand puzzle of his life. One of the last confirmed acquisitions was a vehicle no one really knew. No chrome trim, no muscular bodywork, just a strange chassis painted in faded grey, no license plate, unknown origin. When a curious neighbor asked about it, Frank simply smiled and said, "It's older than you think." Then he quietly pushed it into the garage. The door shut. No explanation. And that was over a year before Frank died. 3. The sealed mystery. When Frank Fritz breathed his last in September 2024, fans mourned not just a TV legend, but were stunned by a cascade of unsolved mysteries surrounding his death and vast legacy. And the epicenter of all speculation was Frank's legendary car garage, described as a sealed vault of mechanical treasures. Rumors circulated within the collector community. Some believe Frank held a secret list: legendary cars, unreleased prototypes, vanished racing supercars, and one-of-a-kind designs never completed. Another tip claims Frank quietly negotiated with a retired GM engineer who allegedly held a 1960s prototype never shown publicly. No clear evidence exists, just whispers among antique motor enthusiasts, but when it comes to Frank, nothing seems too far-fetched. What was confirmed before he died, Frank made cryptic remarks to a few close friends. Once he said, "There's something in that garage that will outlast us all." In another conversation, he told them, If they open that garage without me, tell them I left everything in it. At the time, nobody paid much attention. Frank often spoke poetically, sometimes obscurely, but now those words echo like a gentle, mysterious warning that Frank's legacy wasn't just about cars. As news of Frank's death spread, people flocked to Davenport, Iowa, where his house and garage stood, hoping to glimpse his legendary collection. But strangely, the entire property was strictly sealed. No images leaked, no items were auctioned. That silence fueled rumors Frank had hidden a mechanical treasure never before revealed. Some die-hard fans believe Frank acquired an original 1903 prototype Harley-Davidson, the only surviving model, but because it was heavily rusted and unverifiable, he kept it hidden in his workshop for years to quietly restore. Others claim they saw that legendary bike being hauled into the garage on a snowy night, its frame draped with army-style tarps. But it didn't stop there. A darker rumor spread rapidly on biker forums. Frank allegedly owned an Indian chief, once belonging to a notorious biker who disappeared in 1971 during an illegal race. During restoration, Frank reportedly discovered bloodstains under the seat and a bullet lodged in the exhaust. That rumor left the collector community in disbelief, yet it also raised the question, why did Frank never sell that bike? The mysteries extended beyond vehicles. The record of Frank's estate was equally inconsistent. Officials claimed he left no formal will yet. Unofficial documents circulated, suggesting he intended to donate his entire motorcycle collection to a secret Montana museum dedicated to forgotten artifacts. But that promise disappeared. Some even believed Frank was writing his memoirs before he died, yet the manuscript was never published. Eyewitnesses claim that they saw him typing late at night, then printing the manuscript and locking it in a safe. After his death, all traces vanished, and the family refused to comment. For the car that shouldn't exist in the garage. Frank's garage, still locked tight, sat like an unopened coffin. While awaiting the division of assets, the garage was sealed under court order as a piece of evidence. Legal procedures required a complete inventory of all personal property, verification of ownership, and listing of any items that might hold value from cash to physical assets. But no one, not even those who knew Frank well, could have guessed what was inside. The day the garage door was opened, it wasn't an ordinary moment. It wasn't mere curiosity. It wasn't the excitement of treasure hunters. It was a heavy silence, the kind that descends when you realize you're about to step into something untouched from a world long gone. Police officers stood silently at the gravel entrance, hands resting on their belts. The estate attorney held the key in his hand. Behind that heavy steel door, years of passion, secrets, and obsession waited to be unearthed. From the outside, the garage looked unremarkable. The steel frame was rusted ivy halfway up the walls, and a side door was dented. It probably hadn't been opened in over a decade. But when the main, rolling door was lifted, inch by inch, dust rose like smoke, carrying the weight of time. Inside, 8 cars were parked side by side, some under tarps, others bare. Even with faded paint, their silhouettes remained majestic, as if time had passed only outside that door. A 1956 Bear sat near the front, its turquoise paint now a dull bluish grey, but still in classic form. Nearby was a 1967 Fairlane GT390, a muscle beast Frank once took pride in. In the back corner sat a gleaming Cadillac Fleetwood, adorned in full chrome. It was a silent museum, frozen in time. But among them, one thing stood out completely. A strange car never recorded in any of Frank's inventories. It was tucked in the back, beneath a grease-stained grey tarp. When the tarp was pulled off, everyone held their breath. The car's shape didn't resemble any known model. The body sat low with unusual curves and a wide tail like a prototype racer. No license plate, no branding, no one could identify what it was. And right then, one unavoidable question echoed in every mind. What had Frank found? And why had he never told anyone? One of the officers stepped slowly toward the back of the garage where the old tarp covered the strange car. He bent down, gently lifted the cover, and in that exact moment, everything changed. Beneath the dust-covered cloth was a Corvette, but not one anyone had ever seen in real life. Its lines were sharper, more aggressive than any Stingray from Chevrolet. The body appeared handcrafted, the front nearly scraping the floor while the rear flared wide, as if designed to shatter every known design rule. But what made the air in the garage turn heavy wasn't just the car's shape. It was that it had no VIN vehicle identification number in any of the standard locations. Instead, a small brass plate, aged and tarnished, was fixed to the firewall, hand-engraved with a strange set of characters that matched no known General Motors code. Officers immediately made calls. The estate attorney took hurried notes. No one dared touch the car again, but none of them could stop staring. Something about this wasn't right. Very not right. On the dust-covered wall just above Frank's old oak workbench, someone spotted a slip of paper. Yellowed with age ink smudged, but still legible, it read, "I left everything in there." Frank, no explanation, no treasure map. But it felt like a message or a challenge, as if he wanted someone to find it, as if he knew this day would come. Later, a local mechanic was brought in to assess the vehicles in the garage. When he saw the mysterious Corvette, he nearly froze. In his view, it could be a replica of the 1963 Corvette Grand Sport, a prototype race car of extreme rarity. But many things didn't add up. Very much didn't add up. Only 5 Grand Sports were ever built by Chevrolet, and all 5 had been accounted for. Yet here before them was a 6th or something like it. Frank never spoke of this car, never mentioned it in interviews, never revealed it on his shows, never wrote it down. A car like this, if real, would send shockwaves through the entire collector world. Yet he hid it quietly, like a private treasure. That raised a storm of questions. How did Frank get it? Where did it come from? And most of all, why didn't he tell anyone? Experts, collectors, even retired GM engineers began flocking to the town. They couldn't sit still. They needed to know how a humble man like Frank, who traveled across America collecting mechanical memories, could have found an artifact the entire automotive industry had tried to forget. Frank had always lived on the edge of the impossible, and maybe, just maybe, he was the only one who ever laid hands on it, and then carefully hid it from the world. The car stirred, not just curiosity, but a shockwave through the room. A Corvette that didn't match any known production records. A prototype body, bizarre design, no plate, no records, no VIN. And it came from a collector famous for his near-obsessive precision in every piece he owned. Those details sent chills down many spines. This clearly wasn't coincidence. The question now wasn't what the car was, but why it had been hidden. How did it end up in Frank's garage? Who made it? And was it ever driven? If this was truly a Grand Sport prototype, How had Frank gotten it when even General Motors never acknowledged its existence? And if it was a replica, who had the skill and means to build something so perfect? A storm of questions followed, and no one had answers. A close source revealed that Fritz had quietly bought the car's body and parts from a retired GM engineer in the early 2000s, years before his health declined. Another source claimed he got it through a shadowy deal at an estate auction in Flint, Michigan, not far from the old General Motors site. These stories, though unverified, kept surfacing like urban legends. And strangely, they fit Frank's lifestyle perfectly. But what truly sent shivers down people's spines wasn't just the car's existence. It was the long silence afterward. General Motors gave no official statement. When pressed by media, a spokesperson coldly responded, "We have no information about any such vehicle." That complete denial only fueled the public's imagination. In the shadows, retired engineers and mechanics whispered maybe there were more grand sports than the 5 officially declared. Maybe GM once built several secret prototypes, then hid them from the books. And when the project was scrapped, those cars were quietly scattered. If that's true, then Frank's car might be the first crack in a secret no one had dared to speak of until now. 5. Mike Wolfe fights for the inheritance. When news of the bizarre Corvette discovered in Fritz's garage spread like wildfire, a frenzy erupted. It wasn't just idle gossip. Among collector circles, major players started to move. A classic car museum in California sent a written offer with a dream price. A Middle Eastern billionaire known for owning the rarest Bugatti collection in the world was ready to fly to Iowa just to see the car in person. An international auction house, rumored to be either Christie's or R.M. Sotheby's, sent a sealed letter containing an offer you can't refuse. But Fritz's estate management, by legal obligation, rejected them all. However, no one expected that Mike Wolfe, Frank's longtime companion on American Pickers for over a decade, would be the first to enter the battlefield. Mike showed up at Frank's attorney's office with an old copy of a will that vaguely referenced assets pertaining to rare vehicles. He claimed Frank had verbally mentioned something very special being saved for Mike. Flashing the familiar TV smile, Mike pulled out stacks of documents, photos, and clips from old episodes to prove their close bond, and implied he had a right to the car. It didn't stop there. Mike hired a renowned legal team specializing in complex estate disputes to apply pressure. Publicly, he maintained the image of a grieving friend mourning Frank's passing. But behind the scenes, a legal war was quietly unfolding. In a closed-door meeting with estate representatives, Mike presented a strange argument: that the car was part of the spiritual legacy of American Pickers, and therefore belonged to those who helped create the show. It was a mix of sentiment and legal maneuvering, but it couldn't be dismissed outright. The media jumped in. From simple headlines like, "What is the mystery car in Fritz's garage?" the narrative shifted to Mike Wolfe, loyal friend or opportunist. Some loyal fans defended Mike, claiming that if Frank truly wanted to hide the car, he must have meant it for someone he deeply trusted. But others were furious. Frank had spent his final years in isolation, estranged from Mike after a public fallout. And now Mike had returned, not for sentiment, but for a car potentially worth millions. In a shocking twist, a former American Pickers crew member stated that Frank had once sworn not to let Mike touch anything in his garage after he dies. While the claim had no legal standing, it delivered a heavy psychological blow. Lawyers representing the estate quickly filed a court order to halt all claims on the Corvette until legal ownership could be determined. Outside the garage, press crews waited, snapping photos of the mysterious car through the dusty windows. Mike, undeterred, appeared on a popular podcast, part teary, part angry. Frank and I scoured the country for weird stuff like this. If he found it, I know he thought of me. We were brothers. The words echoed in fans' hearts, but they didn't erase the truth. Frank had not mentioned Mike in the official will. As the court had yet to rule, the Corvette remained cold and untouched in the sealed garage, a mechanical relic no one dared move. But now, it was more than a car. It had become the symbol of untold secrets, broken friendship, greed, and betrayal. And the biggest question of all, did Frank Fritz know that his best friend would one day fight for the last thing he left behind? For now, the car remains, where it was locked in legal limbo, surrounded by experts and lawyers still unable to answer the basic question, what exactly is it? Maybe the fact that Frank never said a word about it while alive is the real clue. Not everything discovered needs to be explained. Some things are meant to simply exist, silent and mysterious. The car, the one that was never supposed to exist, is now an inseparable part of Frank Fritz's legacy. Whether verified or forever a beautiful mystery, it holds more of his spirit than any antique he ever collected. Because ultimately it wasn't meant to prove anything. It was meant to preserve something no one needed to know. And Frank understood that some doors are better left closed. And yet that car has now become the center of a legal firestorm, dragging Mike Wolfe into betraying the very man who helped make him famous. Is a legacy still sacred when it's fought over in the name of greed, wrapped in the language of friendship? And are we the ones who loved Frank, truly honoring him, or just forcing open a door he meant to keep shut forever? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story stirred something inside you, like and subscribe to the channel to explore more untold stories with us. Thank you for watching.